Melanie Reif, Administrative Law Judge for the Utah Public Service Commission. And this morning we will be hearing Docket 17-03501. And this is the hearing that is scheduled for this time and date, Wednesday, April 19th, 2017 at 9 a.m. Let's start first by taking appearances, please, starting with you, Ms. Hogle.
Good morning. This is Yvonne Hogle with Rocky Mountain Power. With me here today is Mr. Mike Wilding, and on the phone is Mr. Robert Meredith, both who will be testifying in support of the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hogle. Mr. Jetter.
Good morning. I'm Justin Jetter with the Utah Attorney General's Office, and I'm here today representing the Utah Division of Public Utilities. And with me at council table is David Thompson with the Division of Public Utilities, and he will be the only witness for the division this morning.
Thank you.
Robert Moore for the Office of Consumer Services. With me is Michelle Breck, Director of the Office of Consumer Services. She's not here to testify, but she's available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
And then
Mr. Dodge.
Gary Dodge, on behalf of the Utah Association of Energy Users. UAE submitted reply comments but does not intend to call a witness.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. Before we get to the heart of the matter this morning, I wanted to address a preliminary issue that is pending before the Commission right now, and that is the petition to intervene by UAE, which has not been acted upon as of yet, and I thought it would be a good idea for us to address that right out of the chute this morning. With that said, is there any objection to the motion, or the petition, excuse me, that's been made to intervene by UAE? Hearing none, the petition is granted. We'll move on to the substantive matter for the hearing. And Ms. Hogle, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you. The company calls Mr. Mike Wilding and proposes, if it pleases you, Ms. Hearing Officer, that he testifies where he is.
Sure. That's just fine, Mr. Wilding. I'll go ahead and swear you in. And do you swear to tell the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Wilding.
Good morning.
Can you please state your name, place of employment, and position for the record?
Yes, my name is Michael G. Wilding. Work for Pacific Corp as the manager of Net Power Cost.
And in that capacity, did you prepare direct testimony with attached exhibits MGW1 through MGW3?
Yes.
And do you have any changes to that testimony?
No.
So if I asked you the questions therein again today, your answers would be the same?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, I'd like to move for the admission of the direct testimony and exhibits MGW1 through MGW3 into the record.
Any objection? Hearing none, they're admitted.
Mr. Wilding, do you have a summary that you would like to present to the Commission today?
Yes, I do. Yes, the company recommends that the Commission approve a refund of $6.5 million to customers on an interim basis effective May 1, 2017, consistent with the Commission's orders from the recent docket addressing changes to the EBA and consistent with the DPU's recommendation in its preliminary report filed March 31st, 2017. However, as this is the first EBA with interim rates, there is a 6-month period in which the collections from the 2016 EBA and the refund from the 2017 EBA or this proceeding overlap. And because of this overlap, the first rate decrease would be effective on an interim basis on May 1st, and then a second decrease would occur sometime around September when the 2016 EBA has been fully collected. And so based on discussions with parties this morning, and if the Commission desires just a single rate change, an alternative approach would be to offset the amount that we're currently collecting for the 2016 EBA with the refund amount from the 2017 EBA, with the possible exception of one special contract customer who is questioning its EBA charge, and the company would carve this amount out from the alternative approach. And then the current EBA rates would continue to be effective until the net balance of the two EBA amounts was collected, which would be sometime in the next few months, possibly around June. And then as we got closer to that point, when that net balance was going to be fully collected, the company would file to change interim rates at that time to 0. And then that would be carried forward, and any subsequent balance or changes that resulted from the EBA review process would be carried forward to next year's EBA as per the process established by the commission.
Do you have any final comments, Mr. Wilding?
Yes, the company recommends that the commission either approve the refund of $6.5 million to customers on an interim basis effective May 1, or the alternate approach that has been discussed with parties and that I've proposed here today.
Thank you, Mr. Wilding. Mr. Wilding is now available for questions.
Mr. Jetter?
Sorry, no questions from the division. Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
The office has no questions, thank you.
Mr. Dodge?
No questions.
Mr. Wilding, let me make sure I understand your position. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you are agreeing to what Mr. Dodge has presented and what the office has presented in their comments as an alternative. Do you have a preference over one over the other?
So I think our proposal is slightly different from what they proposed, in that it would be a single rate change, and we would not change rates until the net balance of the two. So, and let me step back a minute. So there's about a $9.5 million balance from last year's EBA, from the 2016 EBA. And so we would net that against the $6.5 million refund to customers in this EBA, and we would keep the current rates in effect until that net balance, that $3 million, was collected, and at which time we would set interim rates to 0. So it's very similar to what the office and UAE proposed, but it is not the same. It's a different alternative. Yeah. And we did discuss that with parties this morning, and parties were agreeable to that solution.
Ms. Hochul, is there something that you intend to present to the commission in the way of an agreed-upon alternative, a stipulation, for example?
I think that the company has presented it. I think that it will be, my expectation is that the parties who were discussing it this morning will present their testimony. So in terms of a stipulation, you will get it live, I believe.
Okay, very good. All right. Thank you, Mr. Wilding. Thank you, Ms. Hochul.
The company calls Mr. Robert Meredith.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Meredith, are you on the line?
Can you hear me?
I wonder if we don't need it.
Can you?
Yes, sorry about that, Mr. Meredith. We can hear you, and I think we're going to proceed without that microphone. I'm going to go ahead and swear you in now. Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Meredith. Can you please state your name and position for the record?
Yes, my name is Robert M. Meredith. I work for the company as the manager of pricing, cost of service, place of employment is 825 Northeast Multnomah Street, Suite 2000, Portland, Oregon 97232.
And in that capacity, did you prepare direct testimony with attached exhibits RMM1 through RMM4?
Yes, I did.
And do you have any changes to that testimony?
No.
So if I asked you the questions in your testimony again here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to move for the admission of the direct testimony of Mr. Robert Meredith with attached exhibits RMM1 through RMM4.
Any objection? They're admitted.
Thank you. Mr. Meredith is available for questions.
No questions from the division.
And no questions from the office.
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Meredith, I do have a question, and it relates to the question that I asked of Mr. Wilding earlier, which is whether the company is in agreement that the proposal that has either been submitted by the company or the alternative that has been proposed this morning be accepted by the commission. Is that your understanding of the company's position?
Yes.
Okay. And my follow-up question, this may be a question for either Mr. Meredith or Mr. Wilding, is that in as much as it's been pointed out that this is the first rate decrease that has been requested by the EBA, does what is being proposed here outside of the interim rate process that has been ordered previously, do the parties have the intention of treating that kind of issue the same going forward, or is this just a special circumstance because of this particular issue in this particular docket? Can you reflect upon that for us, please?
I think this is a special circumstance in this particular docket because, as Mr. Wilding had indicated, we have this issue where we have overlapping periods with both the 2017 EBA deferral collection as well as the 2016 EBA deferral collection. So I think that going forward in future EBAs with this process, we won't have the same issue.
Okay. Thank you very much for that clarification, sir. I don't have any further questions, so Ms. Hogle, unless you have anything further. Okay, thank you. Mr. Jetter?
Good morning. The division would like to call and have sworn in Mr. David Thompson.
Mr. Thompson, do you swear to tell the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Would you please state your name and occupation for the record?
My name is David Thompson. I'm a utility technical consultant for the Division of Public Utilities.
Thank you. And in the course of your employment with the Division of Public Utilities, did you create and cause to be filed with the commission? I believe they are comments dated March 31st, 2017 with a recommendation?
Yes, but I hope they were dated the 30th because that's when I filed them.
Okay. I will leave that as corrected, March 30th, 2017. Do you have any corrections that you'd like to make to that recommendation?
I do not.
And I guess I would move at this time to enter the division's comments that were filed by Dave Thompson in the record, into the record of this hearing.
Any objection? Mr. Jetter, if it helps, it was March 31st.
March 31st, okay.
Okay.
So they're admitted,
Thank you.
that correction.
I thought it was the 30th. I apologize.
Mr. Thompson, have you prepared a brief statement to read into the record?
I have.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. The Division of Public Utilities has performed a preliminary review of the Rocky Mountain Power application as filed, and based on the overall body of information in the energy balancing account filing, the division at this time believes the filing does not depart from prior year's filings. The division recommends that the Public Service Commission acknowledge that the company's filing as being complete and that interim rates based on the application be approved effective May 1 to be amortized through April 30th the following year, unless otherwise determined by commission order. An alternative proposal has been suggested by parties, and the division would not oppose that proposal. And that concludes my testimony.
I have no further questions, and Mr. Thompson's available for cross-examination by parties or the questions from the hearing officer.
Ms. Hochul, any questions?
Just one clarification. Mr. Thompson, I just want to be clear about what your second proposal was. Am I correct in understanding that the division does not oppose, the alternative approach that the parties discussed this morning and that Mr. Wilding testified to?
That is true.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
No questions.
And Mr. Dodge?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. One follow-up. Similar to what I asked earlier to the parties representing the company, concerning the alternative approach that's pending before the commission, is it your understanding that the approach that is being proposed is an approach that would be applicable in this docket only, not in other dockets that might involve decreases?
Yes, it is. Just this docket special.
Okay. All right, thank you. Mr. Jetter, any follow-up?
I have no follow-up. Thank
Okay.
you.
Mr. Moore?
Just to say that the office advocates for the alternative approach set out by the company and the division. And Director Beck is available for any questions if you would like her to be sworn.
Okay. To the extent that the commission would like clarification as to the office's position on the alternative approach that's being proposed, I think it would be helpful to swear in Ms. Beck. Ms. Beck, good morning. Do you swear to tell the truth?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So is it your understanding that the office is supporting the alternative approach?
Yes, the office does support the alternative approach specifically as outlined by Mr. Wilding this morning. And I concur with Rocky Mountain Power that it is slightly different than what we envisioned in the comments that we submitted to the commission. But we do explicitly here today support what they have put forward.
Okay. And regarding the issue of whether this approach would be specific to this docket or other dockets where we have decreases in rates in EBA matters, do you see this approach as being unique to this situation or applicable in other situations as well?
Well, I think the approach, the agreement upon this approach is likely unique to this situation. But I could very much envision future scenarios where we would advocate for the same.
Okay.
It would be our expectation that we would need to bring our arguments at that time.
Okay. I think it might be helpful, if you don't mind, to reiterate your understanding based on the change that Mr. Wilding proposed this morning that alters what was filed by the office and UAE in this matter, just so the commission has a clear vision of exactly what the timeline looks like and how you're seeing this playing out.
Okay. I'm not certain that UAE and the office filed identical positions,
Okay.
but I feel like at this point it would be most helpful not to focus on what was filed, but instead to focus on what we support at this point. And the office does not want to characterize this as interim rates because, as you know from our filing, we are not at this time waiving our arguments on that issue from a legal perspective. But from an operational accounting perspective, it is our understanding that there is something around $9.5 million that is yet to be collected from the last EBA filing. And then there is $6.5 million of a credit that is being proposed at this time by the company. And certainly at the end of this docket, it may be found that there's a different number, but that's what's being requested at this time. So my understanding is that the 6.5 million would just be credited against the account that's carrying a balance of 9.5 million, which results in 3 million yet to be collected. And I'm not intimately familiar with these numbers. Those are round numbers. And so the agreement then is to, rather than making a rate change at this time, keep the former rate in place until the 3 million is collected. Now, obviously, 3 million will be collected more quickly than the 9.5 would, so that rate's not going to stay in place as long as it otherwise would have. My understanding from what Mr. Wilding testified to this morning is that the rate that's currently in place would only need to stay in place for maybe another couple of months, that probably around June it will have come very close to recovering the full balance. And at that point, the rate would go to zero. I do not take a position on the filing that would be made for that, but I understand that the company has intentions to come in and ask for an interim rate at zero at that point in time, and we would not oppose that.
Okay.
And then my final understanding of this process would be that any changes that would come out from this this docket at the end of testimony and hearings, as well as any small residual that might be left in the account. As I'm sure you are aware, when riders like this are collected, it's hard to get precisely to zero, so there's oftentimes a little residual. So my understanding from the parties' discussion this morning is that that residual, as well as any outcomes from this proceeding, would then come into a future rate change as originally contemplated next year.
Thank you, Ms. Beck. That's very helpful. I really do appreciate that. Was there any follow-up that you wish to add, Mr. Moore?
No.
Okay. And considering Ms. Beck's explanation, does anyone wish to add anything or ask any questions as a result?
I would only state that UA supports the explanation that Ms. Beck has given of
Okay.
the understanding.
Thank you.
And I think, just on behalf of the division, I would confirm that that was matching our understanding of the discussion that we had this morning, and agreed that the division is sort of indifferent to either option, but that's how we understand it, and we certainly don't oppose that as an alternative.
Okay. Ms.
And the
Hochul?
company has no questions.
Okay. And just to follow up, did Ms. Beck's explanation, is that consistent with your understanding and the company's understanding of what's being proposed?
Yes, her explanation about about the office's position with regard to interim rates in particular is her position, and the company does not share that. However, the way that I heard Ms. Beck explain, in her view, what was the understanding of the parties this morning, the company, it is a company's view that it's consistent with what Mr. Wilding testified to.
Okay, thank you very much. That was the gist of my question, and thank you for clarifying that. I do appreciate it. Okay. Mr. Dodge, I realize you don't have a witness this morning, but, and you have made your statement just a moment ago. Do you wish to add anything further?
No, but thank you very much.
Okay, very good. All right. Is there anything else to come before the commission today? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for being here this morning and for your explanation, and the commission will take this under consideration and issue a ruling. Thank you very much.